black man walks up to the gate for his first-class seat, boarding pass in hand, calm, collected. But the gate agent says, "There's no record of you." Then another passenger, white, late, no boarding pass scanned, gets ushered through like royalty. The man? He doesn't argue. He doesn't raise his voice. He just steps aside, opens his phone and makes one quiet call. 10 minutes later, the captain of the plane is being escorted off the aircraft, and the entire gate, stunned silent. What happened in those 10 minutes? Who was that man? And how did the power flip without a single shout? This isn't just a story about a boarding pass. It's about what happens when the person they tried to erase turns out to be the one who writes the rules. Stay with me, because you won't believe who he really is and what he does next. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. This is first class. Only..." The words weren't shouted, but they didn't have to be. They cut just the same. The gate agent's voice was calm, even rehearsed, the kind of tone people use when they've already decided what box to put you in. Julian Ward didn't flinch. He just stood there. 6'2", mid-40s, dark brown skin, salt and pepper beard trimmed close, dressed in a simple navy cardigan, oatmeal slacks and a vintage leather satchel slung over one shoulder. No flashy watch, no entourage, no noise, just presence. And that made some people nervous. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. This is first class only." The words weren't shouted, but they didn't have to be. They cut just the same. The gate agent's voice was calm, even rehearsed, the kind of tone people use when they've already decided what box to put you in. Julian Ward didn't flinch. He just stood there, 6'2", mid-40s, dark brown skin, salt and pepper beard trimmed close, dressed in a simple navy cardigan, oatmeal slacks, and a vintage leather satchel slung over one shoulder. No flashy watch, no entourage, no noise, just presence. And that made some people nervous. The Delta One boarding lane at JFK Terminal 4 had already started to buzz. Folks were boarding Flight 362 to San Francisco. Business execs in sneakers, influencers in full glam, hedge fund dads and yoga moms juggling toddlers and laptops. It was a full cast. Julian stepped forward, presented his boarding pass, digital naturally, and his government ID. The agent, white, 30s, stiff ponytail, badge read Danielle M., didn't scan either. She glanced once, twice, then frowned. "You're not on the first-class manifest," she said curtly. "You'll need to wait to the side." Julian tilted his head. "Could you try scanning it?" She didn't move. "Sir, this lane is for elite passengers." The word elite hung in the air like a challenge, like a test. From behind him, a man in a Patagonia vest and loud Bluetooth headset scoffed. "This guy again? I saw him at the lounge earlier, trying to get in. Guess he thinks politeness is a boarding pass." Someone laughed. Just one person, but it was enough. Enough for Julian to know this wasn't confusion. This was a moment. And everyone was watching. Let's pause right here. Because in about 10 minutes, the people who judged this man based on his skin, his silence, and his style would discover something they weren't ready for. They would learn that he didn't just belong on that plane, he owned it. That the man they tried to dismiss quietly had the power to dismiss them. But we're not there yet. Not just yet. Before the plane ever left the gate, before the coffee even finished brewing in the galley, a system was about to reveal itself. Not broken, but designed that way. So let me ask you real quick, where are you listening from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if this story already has you leaning in, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's ever had to earn their seat in a room they already paid for. Because today we're not just talking about a flight, we're talking about altitude and attitude, and what happens when the two collide. Back at the gate, Julian stayed calm. "I'm asking you," he said, his voice low but firm, "to scan the pass." Danielle hesitated, not because she doubted her gut, but because a few nearby passengers were now watching too closely. A young black woman in a sharp blazer tilted her head. A Latino couple whispered to each other. Danielle finally picked up the scanner. Beep. Her screen lit up green, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "There must be a system error. Your name's not on my list." Julian offered a slight smile. "Then maybe the list is wrong." Inside the plane in 2A, Captain Warren Mccclure had already taken his seat. A 28-year veteran of commercial aviation, he was known for two things: his punctuality and his politics. The moment Danielle radioed in a possible boarding irregularity, Mccclure made his way to the jet bridge. Julian saw him coming, tall, graying, and already frowning. "What's the issue?" Mccclure asked, eyes locking on Julian. "He scanned as first class, but not on my manifest," Danielle replied. Mccclure turned to Julian. "Mind telling me who booked your seat, sir?" "Corporate," Julian replied. "But that's not the question you should be asking." Mccclure raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What should I be asking?" Julian met his gaze. "Why is your system missing a name that funds the entire flight?" 10 minutes later, in front of the crew, the gate agents, and a slowly forming crowd near the boarding area, Julian would open his phone, make one short call, and say the words, "Effective immediately, Captain Warren Mccclure is relieved of duty. Please remove him from the aircraft." But in this moment, all anyone saw was a black man asking to be treated like a human being. And that was apparently asking too much. "We've had these stunts before, sir. If you don't have proper documentation, I suggest you stop holding up the boarding process." That was the captain, not security, not a gate agent, the pilot. Julian Ward didn't say a word. He just looked at the man in uniform, tall, red-faced, with that unshakable confidence only decades of unchecked command can build, and blinked, slow. Then he turned and stepped aside. Not back, not down, just aside. Because sometimes you don't need to move to shift the weight of a room. Inside the boarding gate, the temperature had changed. You know how some moments feel wrong before anyone says it out loud? This was that. You could hear the click of acrylic nails pausing over phones, the hush in side conversations, the way people began to pretend they weren't watching. But they were. Every breath was quieter now, every glance sharper. In 2C, Omar Saeed, a systems engineer from Mountain View, adjusted his glasses and stared at his Delta app. He wasn't trying to be nosy, but the last refresh had just glitched. The seat map updated strangely. At 8:08 a.m., seat 2A had been listed as pending assignment. By 8:14 a.m., it showed a confirmed traveler, but no name, just a profile marked unknown system hold. That wasn't normal. Omar had built platforms like this before. He knew the signs of a manual override. Back at the gate, Danielle's screen blinked again. Red, then green, then gray. He tapped it, swiped, tried again. The manifest data wasn't loading. It's the refresh," she mumbled, half to herself, half to the captain. "We just did a system sync 20 minutes ago, now it's hanging." Captain Mccclure grunted. "Or maybe the system knows when something doesn't belong." Julian tilted his head. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing." A few rows behind the gate desk, Grace Linwood, a senior flight attendant who'd been flying for 20 years, stood with arms folded. He hadn't said a word since the confrontation began. But she was watching closely. She'd seen 1,000 entitled passengers in her life. Julian wasn't one of them. The way he stood, too calm. The way he dressed, understated, elegant, like someone who could afford noise but preferred silence. She tapped her in-ear mic. "Ops, I need eyes on the manifest sync. Something's not matching." "Copy," a voice replied. "Sir," Danielle said again, this time with a little less edge. "I'm just trying to figure out where the confusion is." "No confusion," Julian said gently. "Just resistance." Danielle shifted. "We can get a supervisor to call corporate and verify." Omar finally stood up. "Sorry to interrupt." His voice was low but clear. "I work in back-end system diagnostics. Your manifest was updated manually at 8:14. I saw it live on the app." Danielle blinked. I don't know anything about that." Omar shrugged. I do." The captain turned. "Who are you? Just a passenger who understands source code." A murmur stirred behind them. Someone whispered, "Why is this guy getting singled out?" Another, "Didn't he have a boarding pass?" Grace stepped forward now. She walked toward Julian, slow and steady, like she'd decided something. "Sir," she said, voice warm but professional, "do you have someone we can call to confirm?" Julian glanced at her. There was a flicker of something behind his eyes, not fear, not annoyance, but respect. "They know who I am," he said simply. "They just don't want to say it out loud." Danielle opened her mouth to respond but stopped. Her terminal finally beeped. A message flashed. "Admin alert. High-level uneffect. Do not modify." She froze. Captain Mccclure leaned in to look, then pulled back, jaw tight. "This is above protocol." Julian raised one brow. "And yet, here we are." Mccclure took a step closer. "You still haven't told us who you are." "I haven't needed to," the captain scoffed. "So you just expect to walk on and be treated like royalty?" Julian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No, I expect to be treated like a passenger, one with a seat and a name, whether you admit it or not." Grace exhaled sharply. She turned toward Danielle. "You know something's not right," she said. "You feel it." Danielle didn't answer. Julian reached into his pocket, not fast, not dramatically, and pulled out a phone. He tapped once. "Hold protocol is in place," he said quietly, not to anyone in particular. "Eyes open, record only." From behind the desk, Danielle whispered, "Oh my God." "What?" Grace asked. Danielle slowly turned the terminal toward her. The manifest had just refreshed again, this time with a line of code at the top. "Executive observation flight. Do not interfere." The captain didn't move, but everyone else did. The crowd began to shift. People started recording. Voices rose in low confusion. Someone said, "Wait, is he someone from the board?" Someone else, "No, higher than that." But Julian didn't bask in the chaos. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there. Because he knew. This wasn't the moment of reckoning. It was only the setup. They still thought he was the problem, still believed they had the power, but this was just turbulence. And Julian Ward had weathered worse. He turned slightly, faced the window, and said under his breath, "They think this is the story, but they haven't seen what comes next." "Unauthorized presence has been reported at Gate 7. Stand by for final boarding." The words came through the overhead speaker like static wrapped in steel. Julian didn't even blink, but the people around him did. The phrase wasn't subtle, it wasn't bureaucratic, it was meant to signal, to trigger suspicion. And it worked. Two passengers who had been chatting quietly stopped mid-sentence. A man in a crisp suit leaned toward his wife and whispered, "You think that's about him?" Julian didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Across the gate, Grace Linwood stared at her tablet, her brow furrowed. Something wasn't adding up. She had pulled up the internal crew assignment roster, a tool she rarely questioned. But today it read, 2A cancel by guest no show, 7:34 AME. That couldn't be right. Boarding hadn't even opened until 7:50. Her finger hovered over the screen. Who cancels a seat before the gate opens? Her gut twisted. Inside the plane, in seat 4B, Caleb Torres sat hunched over a slim moleskin notebook. He had no camera, no mic, just a pen, and he was using it fast. He hadn't planned on covering a story today, but when he saw a well-dressed black man being sidelined while another white man, late, flustered, and loud, was waved through with no scan, his journalist radar activated. He'd seen this before. Too many times, but never like this. Not with this much silence from the staff, not with this much calculation. At the terminal window, Omar was still monitoring the app. He turned his phone toward the woman next to him, an older passenger knitting quietly. "Look," he said quietly, "they replaced his name with a dummy profile. It says, guest override. That's not normal." She squinted. "So, you're saying they wiped him?" "I'm saying," Omar said, "they're rewriting the flight record in real time." Back at the gate, Captain Mccclure leaned into his comms. His voice was low, but Grace could hear it through the open cockpit channel. "We pulled the record, it's done. No one will know." Her hand tightened around the tablet. She tapped her mic. "Repeat that, Captain." No reply, just silence. Then a click. Then, "Ops override in place, clear the deck." Julian was still standing off to the side, arms crossed loosely, eyes locked on the departure screen like it owed him answers. Danielle avoided his gaze now. Her screen had frozen 5 minutes ago, and she was starting to sweat. Grace walked over slowly. "Sir," she said softly, "I know you've been more than patient, but I just need to ask, was this seat booked under your name directly or through an assistant?" Julian looked at her calmly. "It was booked through corporate, but that's not the question you really want to ask." Grace hesitated. "Then what is the question?" Julian glanced toward the cockpit, then back at her. "What are they trying to hide?" A voice rang out suddenly from the seating area. An older white woman stood, blazer, pearls, pure posture. "I was here before half the people on this flight," she said firmly. "And that man was already checked in. He scanned his ticket before I did." She turned to Danielle. "So why is he being called unauthorized?" Danielle opened her mouth. Nothing came out. More murmurs followed, people turning in seats, whispering, watching. One man said, "Is this about race?" Another, "It always is. They just wrap it in policy." On the plane, Caleb paused his writing. He glanced down at the crew manifest a flight attendant had left behind while rushing. It was printed, "Unusual." He flipped it open and froze. His pen hovered in midair next to seat 2A. "Observe flag ascent," he exhaled, slowly, then stood. At that moment, Julian tapped his phone once, quietly, intentionally. Then he murmured, "Begin hold. Confirm internal visibility." A voice responded in his ear, soft and crisp. "Confirmed. Logs active. Monitoring all terminals in Zone 4. No one around him heard it, but Grace noticed the shift. His face had changed. Still calm, but something behind the eyes had sharpened. She stepped closer. "Sir? Who are you?" Julian looked at her, and for the first time, his voice dropped the veil. "They're not deleting me, Ms. Linwood. They're exposing themselves. Mr. Ward, if you don't comply, security will escort you off the premises." Captain Mccclure didn't yell it. He didn't need to. His voice had that pilot's pitch, calm, firm, and built for authority. But it wasn't just the words, it was the way he said, "Mr. Ward," like it was an accusation, not a name. Julian didn't even blink. The gate had gone silent. No more fake scrolling, no more distracted sipping. Every eye was locked on the 6'2" black man in a navy cardigan being asked to step away from a seat that was, if anyone cared to check, his. He stood like a monument, unmoved by the wind but aware of every shift in the sky. Then came the final trigger, security. A tall, clean-cut man in a Port Authority jacket stepped forward, one hand on his radio. "Name?" he asked. "Julian Ward." "You have identification?" Julian pulled out the same ID he'd shown 30 minutes ago. "Still me." The officer scanned it with a small device. Beep. A pause. Then a frown. "It's valid." Captain Mccclure stepped forward. "That doesn't matter. He's not on the internal manifest. That's our protocol. But he scanned his first class," the officer said, "and the system cleared him 5 minutes ago." McClure's jaw clenched. "The system is wrong." Julian tilted his head. Or you are? Caleb Torres stood now. The notebook was gone, his phone was out. He stepped forward slowly, calm but purposeful. I'm a journalist, he said aloud, and I have one question for airport security, gate crew, or the captain. Whichever of you wants to speak. Mccclure looked annoyed. Danielle looked terrified. Caleb raised his voice slightly. What's the exact reason this passenger is being denied his seat? Not vague system errors, not missing names. A reason. With documentation. Silence. From near the glass windows, Omar's voice piped up. Quiet, but sharp. They altered the seat assignment at 8:14. I have a time-stamped cache from the app. It showed Mr. Ward confirmed in 2A. Then, poof! Julian turned slightly. Omar held up his phone. Your name didn't vanish, sir. Someone removed it. Whispers, then louder whispers, then phones out. Then the camera shutters began to click. Grace Linwood stepped away from the jet bridge. Her heels were slow, deliberate. She walked over to stand beside Julian. She didn't say much, just stood there. Her presence alone said plenty. Mccclure muttered, "This is a circus." Grace answered evenly, eyes on him. "No, Captain. This is a reckoning." Julian still hadn't raised his voice. He turned to Security Officer Reed. "Do you have a written order to remove me?" Reed shook his head slowly. "Not written." "Then don't touch me," Julian said, "because what you don't write down can still become evidence." Mccclure snapped, "You think waving legal jargon around makes you right?" Julian gave him a long look. "I don't need to be right. I just need the truth to stand still long enough for people to see it." Danielle tapped furiously at her screen, then froze. "Captain," she said, "there's a system note logged 5 minutes ago. Executive observation flight do not modify." Mccclure didn't respond. Grace leaned in. "Observation flight?" Caleb's eyebrows rose. "That's internal audit language." Julian said nothing, just reached for his phone and tapped once. Grace looked at him. "You knew." Julian's voice was soft, but razor clear. "They've built a cockpit of mirrors, Grace, but the cracks are showing. This wasn't personal." "That's what Captain Mccclure said," eyes darting to the ground crew, then the terminal window, then back to Julian. He said it like a disclaimer, like a man caught in a lie trying to rewrite the script before the credits roll. But Julian didn't respond. He didn't need to, because by now, the silence was no longer working for the other side. Omar stepped forward from the crowd, holding up his phone. "I have the system log from 8:14 AUMM. He tapped the screen once. "Right here, a deletion entry. The user ID attached to the manifest change was," he squinted slightly, "WMCClure_capped." Danielle gasped. Someone in the back of the gate let out a stunned, audible "damn." Even Officer Reed, still standing nearby, took a half-step back, his hand no longer near his radio. Mccclure said nothing, his jaw clenched. Grace turned slowly, not toward Julian, toward the captain. "Did you delete him from the manifest?" Mccclure held her gaze for a beat too long. "I triggered a protocol," he said stiffly. "There was an anomaly alert on the internal channel. I followed standard procedure." Caleb stepped forward now, phone still recording. "Captain," he said, "you told someone over comms, and I quote, 'We pulled the record. It's done. No one will know.'" His voice was calm. His face wasn't. "I was sitting close to the cabin feed. That audio came through your mic, and I recorded it." Danielle looked like she might cry. Julian turned to her, gently. "Did you follow protocol or follow someone's orders?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Behind her, the check-in monitor refreshed again. This time, the system message blinked red for all to see. "Unauthorized modification detected. Executive oversight. Engaged manifest adjustments logged." Grace pulled out her own crew device and connected to the internal hotline. "This is Senior Attendant Grace Linwood. I need an immediate executive ID confirmation for a passenger, Julian Ward. A pause, then a calm, clipped voice replied, Julian Ward? Confirmed. Executive oversight level, observation flight registered, do not obstruct. Grace looked up slowly. He's not just a passenger, she said clearly, her voice shaking only slightly. He's a measure of integrity. Mccclure started to speak. Something about automated protocol, about legacy software, about foggy permissions, but no one was listening anymore because the damage had already spoken, and it was permanent. Julian remained still. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply took one step forward, looked directly at Mccclure, and asked without a hint of venom, "Who wrote the anomaly notice?" Mccclure hesitated. Was it Danielle? Ops? Security? Each name landed like a gavel strike. Then Julian said quietly for everyone to hear, "Or did you write it yourself?" No one moved, no one answered, but everyone understood. Initiate internal compliance record. Julian's voice was quiet, clear, as if he were ordering tea, but the effect wasn't gentle. In his earpiece, a calm female voice replied, "Confirmed. Recording initiated. Full compliance log in progress. Internal timestamp active." Danielle froze where she stood. Mcclure's jaw twitched. Even Officer Reed turned his head slightly, like he'd just realized this wasn't an ordinary passenger spat. A low hum filled the space, not mechanical, but emotional. You know that silence, right? The one just before someone confesses or collapses or both? Danielle cracked first. She stammered, then blinked hard. "He told me it was just a systems test, a protocol check, nothing real." Grace turned to her. "Who's he?" Danielle swallowed. "Captain Mccclure. He said it was part of the compliance drills, that corporate wanted to simulate a high-risk flag, that it wasn't real." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You tampered with a real passenger's record based on a verbal instruction?" Danielle nodded, slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know it was him. I didn't know it was—" Julian held up a hand. "Stop." She did. He stepped forward just one pace closer and looked her directly in the eye. "You weren't afraid of me. You were afraid of losing your job. But you lost something else first." Danielle's eyes welled up. She looked down, ashamed, but didn't deny it. Grace, now visibly angry but composed, turned to the control panel near the jet bridge. She accessed the crew activity log, a system rarely used outside tech audits. Her fingers flew. Beep, that, scroll, pause. Then she whispered, "Got it." She looked up and said, loud enough for the gape to hear, "Captain Mccclure used an external credential key, not a flight login. He accessed the manifest through a side portal, no official authorization code." Omar leaned toward her. "That means it's a backdoor login." Grace nodded. "Used for senior staff, but never for deleting passenger data." The air shifted. The crowd murmured. Someone said, "That's illegal, right?" Caleb muttered, "It's not just illegal, it's a pattern, with a password." Julian turned slowly to face the captain. His voice never rose. "This isn't about a name being removed. It's about who has permission to erase and how long they've been using it to make people disappear." Mccclure looked around, but there were no allies left. Even Officer Reed was stepping away now, politely, quietly, like a man leaving a table he no longer wanted to be seated at. Then Julian turned to the rest of them. Passengers, crew, onlookers, who hadn't dared to speak, but hadn't looked away either. He spoke not like a man on the defensive, but like one who had carried this moment in his bones for years. "Every day, people like me walk into rooms, board planes, show up for meetings, and get asked to prove we belong, while people like him," he gestured toward Mccclure, "get the power to decide we don't." A hush, then a few nods. And then Julian said, "This is the last moment you get to decide who I am. After this, I decide what happens next." I don't care who he is. We can't have them testing us, not his kind." The recording wasn't perfect, a little grainy, a little muffled, but the words were crystal clear, and once Caleb hit play, there was no undoing them. The lounge, already tense, went still. Not the quiet kind of still, the kind that makes every breath feel too loud. Danielle gasped softly and looked away. Omar closed his laptop slowly. Even Officer Reed straightened his posture. Because in 7 seconds, Captain Warren Mccclure had said more than anyone needed to know. Not just what he did, but why. Grace stepped forward, not hiding her rage now. She turned to the passengers. "Let's stop calling it a glitch. Let's stop calling it protocol. What you just heard was a choice." She paused, then added sharper, "A coward's choice." Mccclure raised a shaky hand. "It was taken out of context," he muttered. "That wasn't an official channel. It wasn't meant to be recorded." Caleb didn't move, just stared at him. Neither was this moment. But here we are. A few rows back, a young black woman in a crisp green suit stood. She had been silent the whole time, watching, waiting. "My name's Nia Monroe. I'm the owner of a textile company in Chicago. Today was my first time flying first class." She took a slow breath. "If Mr. Ward doesn't belong here, then neither do I." The room turned with her. Someone clapped, then another, then a few people stood. Not many, but enough to change the air pressure in that terminal. Julian didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even blink. He let it breathe. Then finally he spoke. "I didn't come here to be seen. I came to see who was watching." He stepped forward once. "This wasn't a test of my patience. It was a test of your character." He looked directly at Mccclure, at Danielle, at the security officer, at every system that stood by in silence. "And most of you just failed." Loudly. Mccclure tried one last gasp of control. "I was following a suggestion from senior compliance. It came from corporate. He was flagged for anomaly. This wasn't my decision." But Grace cut in. "Firm, clear. You logged in through a backdoor credential. You issued the deletion. You coached the gate staff. You lied to your crew." She turned to Danielle. "And you helped him do it." Danielle wept now, full shoulders shaking. Julian didn't look at either of them anymore. He looked at the passengers, at the ones who stayed seated, at the ones who stood late, and especially at the ones who stood first. Then he tapped his phone one last time. "Evelyn," he said softly. A voice responded instantly through his earpiece. "Yes, sir?" "Prepare the announcement." "Understood." "Evelyn," Julian said softly, phone still in his palm, voice as calm as a glass lake at dawn. "Begin corporate verification protocol." There was a 2-second pause, barely long enough to breathe. Then the response came, "Protocol active. Distribution initiated. First confirmation received, second inbound." The voice in his ear, Evelyn, sounded like a machine, but it wasn't AI. She was a person, a very real person, and she only answered to him. Inside Gate 7, a hush fell. Again, but this one was different. It wasn't the tense silence of confusion, it was the unnerving quiet of realization. You could feel it, like a tide pulling backward before a wave hits. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't move closer. He just stood there, speaking to no one in particular. You thought this was about a seat. His eyes drifted slow across the room, over Danielle, over Mccclure, over the trembling monitors and blinking badges. "But I've built companies bigger than this airport," he smiled barely. "I don't fight for first class. I fund the technology that built it." Danielle's knees nearly buckled. Her hand found the counter. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Mccclure stepped back just one step, but it was enough. "Wait," he said, voice cracking. "You're him?" Julian turned, finally facing him head-on, cool, composed, ruthless only in truth. "I'm the man you flagged as a risk, but I also signed your last paycheck." Behind them, a passenger dropped their coffee. Literally, the cup hit the floor with a muted splash, but no one turned, because every eye was fixed on Julian Ward, a name that now echoed through memories, headlines, investment articles, and private memos. Nia Monroe gasped quietly. She pulled out her phone, typing into a browser, "Julian Ward, Elvair Holdings CEO." The results loaded: stock photos, Forbes covers, Harvard interviews, and then one headline: "The silent partner behind America's smart airport revolution." Her mouth dropped open. She turned to the older white man next to her and whispered, "They tried to erase him?" He didn't respond. He couldn't. Julian adjusted the cuff of his jacket, a quiet gesture, then said, almost like a closing argument, "Real power doesn't scream. It signs, quietly, then watches who listens." In his ear, Evelyn's voice returned. "3 confirmations in. Captain Mcclure's access has been revoked. Compliance has locked Danielle's terminal. A representative is en route to Gate 7. Julian blinked once. "Thank you." Then he looked up and said, to everyone and no one, "Now, let's fly." The gate was quiet. Not the awkward kind, not the confused kind. This was reverence. The kind of stillness people give to a man who just rewrote the room. Julian Ward stood where they'd tried to erase him. Same posture, same tone. But now, the weight had shifted. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was deciding. Danielle's tablet buzzed. She looked down, eyes red, hands trembling. A system notice flashed. Access suspended, await further instruction. She didn't move, didn't argue, only nodded. Once, slowly, because she knew. Captain Mccclure was frozen, staring, not blinking. The man who had ordered people off planes for decades was now just another name on a revoked list. Julian finally turned to him. No anger, no vengeance, just the kind of honesty that burns all the way through. "You didn't just lie. You manipulated a system you didn't think would ever speak back." Mccclure swallowed hard. I didn't know it was you." Julian didn't flinch. That was the problem. A sleek woman in a gray blazer entered from the jet bridge. Calm, clipped walk, tablet in hand. "Mr. Ward," she said, "I'm Dana Liu from Internal Compliance. Instructions from the board. You may proceed with full authority. What do you want done?" Julian looked at her. "Reset the gate. Reinstate passenger manifest as of 8:07. IMME. Flag all unauthorized overrides. Suspend parties involved pending review." Dana nodded. "Done." A soft announcement crackled through the gate speakers. "Attention, passengers of Flight 827. Final boarding will now resume. Please prepare to board with updated credentials." The crowd didn't cheer. It wasn't that kind of victory, but they stood taller, looked clearer. A few even clapped quietly. Not for the flight, but for the man who held the gate open without raising his voice. Julian turned to Grace. "You're still lead crew?" She smiled, more out of respect than joy. "Yes, sir." "Then bring us in," he said. "Let's go home." As he passed the gate, someone whispered, "What kind of man walks into his own erasure and rewrites the story mid-sentence?" Someone else replied, "The kind that built the page." 3 weeks later. Same airport, different gate, new policy. A glossy sign now hangs above every first-class counter in the terminal. All passengers will be verified under a dual authentication protocol. No profile may be modified without formal clearance. It's not just words, it's Julian Ward's signature beneath them, and no one dares ignore it now. Grace Linwood walks with confidence. She's been promoted, Senior Director of Onboard Equity and Ethics, a position that didn't exist until Julian wrote it into the system. She doesn't wear a badge. She doesn't need to. People know her, and more importantly, they listen. Danielle? She's on administrative leave, mandatory retraining with an assigned mentor. She sends Grace an email every week, updates, apologies, progress logs. There's no bitterness in her tone, just growth. Some failures teach more than a manual ever could. Captain Mccclure? Gone. Retired early. Statement cited medical stress. But everyone knows his name will show up again someday in lawsuits or footnotes, but not in cockpits. Caleb published his piece a week later, The Man Who Wasn't Supposed to Board. It went viral, not because it was sensational, but because it made people ask how many others didn't have the power to push back. The article ends with a single sentence. Sometimes the revolution wears a cardigan and waits quietly. And Julian? He never gave a public statement. He never tweeted, never sat for a press interview, but Elevair's stock rose 12%, and airport boards across 5 states quietly requested compliance audits the next week. Sometimes change doesn't start with shouting. It starts with listening to silence and refusing to accept it. Julian Ward did more than board the plane that day. He rewired the gate for everyone after him. Sometimes it's not the loudest moment that defines the story. It's the quiet refusal to disappear. This story isn't just about a black CEO denied a seat. It's about how systems are designed to make erasure feel like a clerical error. It's about the subtle ways power hides behind protocol. And it's about what happens when the person they tried to silence owns the very system they used to do it. Julian's story isn't fiction for many of us. It echoes in boardrooms, airport gates, and workplace policies that weren't built with us in mind. But his calm defiance, his controlled strength, his refusal to perform anger, that was radical. If this story moved you, challenged you, or just made you think deeper about who gets to belong, then thank you for staying until the end. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment below, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep the conversation going, because silence never protected us.